This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Welcome to Nature Backed. Today my guest was Jenks from Rare. We had a fascinating discussion which ranged from US elections to Hollywood movies to psychology. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Nature Backed, Brett.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us in a few words, what is Rare?
Our mission is to inspire change so people and nature thrive. So in a few words, we spend a lot of time thinking about what motivates people, how to build new norms, how to shift culture, how to shift behavior so that human beings can live more sustainably on this planet.
Looking at the typical, talk about the climate change and the troubles of the environment, I think talking to the humans and actually listening to them is probably the crucial skill, right?
Yeah, we like to say that if you want to save all the species on Earth, there's only one you really need to understand well, and that's us, human beings.
Mm-hmm. But the Rare story, how have you been kind of growing? What is the? I mean, you talked about the kind of big philosophy behind it, but what's in kind of day-to-day grind? What are you doing exactly?
So we have 5 programs and we have 4 for-profit subsidiaries. So we have a wide portfolio of programs and strategies, all built around the idea that people are a huge opportunity, basically built around the idea that humans are in part the problem, but more so the solution. And that if we want to save biodiversity, if we want to address climate change, we need to understand what motivates people so that we can shift the way we inhabit the planet. What that looks like in practice, 2,000 communities around the world in countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, Mozambique, Brazil, Honduras, Palau, people coming together to change the way they manage their coastal waters, protecting mangroves, protecting coral reefs, protecting seagrass beds, deciding collectively where not to fish so that the fish populations can grow and restore themselves, and then working together to set new rules and regulations so that when they do fish, they fish more sustainably. As a result of that program, we're seeing significant rebounds in the population of the coastal fish that about 500 million people depend on every day for their number one supply of animal protein. So that program is called Fish Forever. And the idea is if we can create new norms by empowering local leaders and building their capacity to communicate, to bring together the communities around them, to shift the way they manage their fisheries, people are better off, and so is nature. That's one program. We have another program in Colombia that's in its pilot phase, where we're trying to do something very similar with regenerative agriculture, helping poor smallholder farmers who are very big in spirit in order to regenerate their soil and the biodiversity on their small farms, which is a way of making their food healthier, their water more plentiful, and their make them better off and make their farms richer in the process. And I can keep going, but there's a wide array of initiatives that we
Mm.
have developed. Today, Rare has about 250 going on 270 full-time staff. We have
Wow.
hundreds, if not thousands, of partner institutions around the world. We have worked so far in 60 countries in the global south. And we've probably, I would guess, we've probably measurably changed the behavior of tens of millions of people, each of whom is proving that every individual has a role to play and can make a difference.
Mm. You said that basically the underlying question or the challenge you guys are facing is that, what motivates people to actually change. Have you found any good answers?
We have. We realize while we've been at this a long time that in the past 25 years there's been a revolution in behavioral science. That for the first time ever, psychologists are winning Nobel Prizes for economics because humans, we have decided, I guess we have learned, are particularly irrational in some ways. We used to think of human beings as Homo economicus instead of Homo sapiens. And the idea is, I like to visualize human beings in a lab walking around with calculators, maximizing the utility of every decision that they make. Should I buy this
Mm.
car? Should I buy this car? And then we assume, an economist will assume we're all calculating the net present value of this particular shade of drapes versus this one, or this car versus another. When in reality, we tend to make decisions much less individually than we give ourselves credit for. In the West, there's the myth of the rugged individualist. It's an archetype. We alone conquer the frontier, and we alone make our own decisions, and we alone, are our own, government and wise counsel. When in reality, we're really more like lemmings with thumbs. We are primates who are tribal, and we tend to fear not looking like our tribe, not acting like our tribe, not fitting in with our tribe. And so, one of the most important things we've learned about human nature that applies to conservation is people tend to do what other people expect them to do. People tend
Mm.
to do what they see other people doing. And people tend to change pretty quickly when they think the rate of change is accelerating. And so, how does this apply to things like climate change? Well, if we want anybody who can afford one to have an array of solar panels on their roof, it's really important that people see those arrays and know that in their neighborhood there are people like them who have solar panels. So, in a way, it's fortunate that we have to put solar panels on rooftops. With electric
Visible.
vehicles, which is another really important solution, it's nice when a car drives by and you know that it's an electric vehicle, because then you can see which of my neighbors are driving electric vehicles, and how many folks in my town are driving electric vehicles. Because once, think about the shoes you're wearing. How many people did you have to see wearing those shoes before you thought, well, maybe they're cool, which is an interesting way of saying maybe they're acceptable? The first time you saw, whatever it was, white high tops, you probably thought, well, that looks like nurses' shoes. But once you saw three of your friends wearing them, at some point you needed a new pair of shoes, and that was the default. The default was the new norm. So you can make this
Mm.
really complicated, or you can make it really simple. And what simple is better when you're trying to help millions of people change their behavior. So we need to make behaviors observable. We need to show what the norm is. We need to influence the innovators and the early adopters so that we can make these new sustainable behaviors more visible and more observable. And then we need to spend more time and energy marketing those early adopters so that eventually we can create new norms. That's
Mm.
the way we can be effective shifting behavior.
Yeah, often I have come across projects where basically assumption is that humans are those Homo economicus, and what really drives the change is the understanding of their financial gain or money on the bank account rather than the cultural change what you are talking about.
Yeah, it's true, and I think they're both important. We
Mm.
tend we have a friend named Elke Weber who's got her own laboratory at Princeton University, and she invented the concept of the single action bias. So as humans, we tend to look very quickly for a single solution. So it must be an economic incentive. And yet, what we find when you look long term at communities that have been given a financial incentive and therefore induced to change their behavior is more often than not, it devalues the behavior. There's a difference between extrinsic motivation, giving somebody $1 to do something,
Mm.
and intrinsic motivation, which might be something more related to their either a norm or their own pride or their own sense of autonomy or their own sense of self worth. Those less tangible forces can be much more lasting and much more powerful than an economic incentive. That said, when you have two relatively equal items, there's no question but that you're going to go for the one that's going to save you money. That's just reasonable. So there's no reason to assume it's one or the other. There are times
Mm.
and places when you want to use emotional appeals, when you want to use social incentives, but there are also times when you want to use economic incentives. And sometimes you have to try and let the audience help you understand which is best at a given time.
Mm. Absolutely. With rare having grown into quite a big size already and a lot of projects around the world, if you would need to pick some projects what you're really proud of where you've been able to initiate real change, what would you maybe underline or?
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Well, I would start at the more generic level. I think the approach that Rare has developed over the years is really significant, and it's differentiated. It's important. Rare takes a distinctly human approach to conservation. It means we spend a lot of time thinking about not just the behavioral insights from psychology or behavioral economics or evolutionary biology, but we also take a human-centered design. We listen to people. We spend a lot of time with focus groups and one-on-one conversations, doing participatory planning. We've spent 30 plus years working in partnership with very poor rural communities in 60 countries in the global South. So the combination of understanding human motivation and listening very deeply to people and our partners is something we're very proud of. What does that let us achieve? It lets us, for example, work originally with 3 small communities in the Philippines and Indonesia to help communities of fisher folk who had seen 60-year declines in the catch per unit effort, meaning a 60-year decline in fish populations. working this particular way has let those three communities set a new example for sustainably managing and restoring the fish populations to the tune of 400 to 500% in just a short period of time, 5 years, 10 years. That little model that we created with our partners on the ground, with the fisher folk themselves, has now been adopted by 2,000 communities. So we're really proud of that initiative. Something else we're really proud of is then turning that sort of homegrown, community-led initiative into a real desire to figure out what else we could learn from the behavioral sciences. So it wasn't long after we decided that that program was successful enough that we could start scaling it, that we also set up the conservation community's first ever Center for Behavior and the Environment. And the Center for Behavior and the Environment is basically, the idea of hiring some of the best postdoc PhDs from around the world, and rather than have them go to Google or Meta or Apple or Amazon to do A/B trials online to sell more socks or more services, what about bringing all of their training and applying it to the question, what can we do to accelerate the adoption of regenerative agriculture, especially among the billion smallholder farmers around the world who feed half of us every day? What can we do to accelerate the adoption of sustainable coastal fishing? What can we do to boost the adoption of rooftop solar, of electric vehicles, of plant-rich diets? What would it look like if we could bring behavioral science to Hollywood and begin to advise showrunners and script writers and producers on the very simple ways that characters in their stories or plot lines or settings or dialogue could have an influence on their viewers, recognizing that some of those streaming services have 500 million to a billion viewers every month. So the question has been, how do you go from individual behavior to collective action by leveraging behavioral insights, by leveraging human-centered design, by listening to people and partnering with them to empower change? That's what we're really proud of at Rare. That's sort of the secret sauce.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Black Friday week starting November 21st.
You're talking about mentioning Hollywood and the streaming services. Then one of the kind of obvious questions, maybe it was more timely last year, was how much do you think the Don't Look Up movie is having an impact on the world? Was it just one short instinct, year or two ago when it was launched, or is it something more comprehensive or bigger?
It's a really good question, and I actually am proud to say we are in a very unique position to be able to advance that question. You probably don't know this, but we did a series of tests of Don't Look Up just as the movie came out. We weren't involved in the production or the writing in any way. We basically got involved just as the movie was being released. So what we decided to do was to answer your question. We had 500 people watch the film. We had 500 people watch the film and then watch a short video with Leo DiCaprio on social media describing why he thought the movie was important and the message that they wanted to get across. And then we had 500 people watch something completely different. So we were able to have an experimental design that's statistically valid. And what it showed was that the movie on its own had a very mild impact. I would say relatively small. We can talk later about what impact it could have had it done a few things differently, but it got a lot of eyeballs, it got a lot of attention. But I would say from a climate action standpoint, not a huge impact. However, once someone watched the film and heard from a cast member a little bit of the thinking behind the production, a little bit of the thinking behind the parable, if you will, there was a 4x increase in people willing to take climate action, people willing to sign up for tips on what they could do, people willing to pledge that they would not vote for a politician in the future if that politician didn't have addressing climate change in his or her platform. And so compared then to the control group, there was a very significant impact. What that showed us was that a movie on its own can be impactful. A movie with an echo chamber around it can be far more effective. It also showed, based on some other research that we did with other programs, even some things that we created ourselves to test, what we have found is just when people see characters they appreciate doing things more sustainably, they are more likely to follow suit, which is obvious, but it still needs to be proven time and time again. And so that's what we're doing now with partners all over that ecosystem.
And it needs to be shown on a big screen, so to say. You said that if they would have done something differently inside the film, it would have had an impact. What do you meant by that?
Well, look, this is more speculation. I don't have data to back this up. I mean, in some ways I do, but it's not data that has anything to do with that particular movie.
Directly with that.
But I think there were a couple of problems. I mean, it was a fun movie. I watched it with my whole family over the holidays.
Same here.
About halfway through the film, one of my nephews yelled out, "Oh, I get it. This is about climate change." So it took a little while for people to get the point. Some people thought it was about COVID. Some people just thought it was about, the ridiculousness of certain political parties. But, initially it turned off a lot of people in America, especially more conservative people, because it seemed like a parody of a Republican administration. And it was sort of, Donald Trump and his children in the White House, only it was Meryl Streep and her children. And I think there's no reason for us. Sure, in a comedy, there's a time and a place to make fun of whoever you want, and that's your right. And you have to entertain to get people's attention, but I do think it was somewhat divisive, and so that was problematic. Second, because then everything turns into a culture war. Second, there were no really good examples of people doing the right thing. The scientists had trouble communicating, and they were frustrated, and they didn't in any way sort of provide. There was no there weren't really characters that provided the view or the moral of the story. There weren't people sort of subtly doing the right thing. There were no nudges or encouragement that there are solutions, that there are reasonable people, and that we can all make a difference. So in that regard, I think it missed the mark. The ending was ridiculous. I mean, it was funny, but it was so absurd that it sort of made a parody of the parody. And so that was a little disappointing. But regardless, I love the folks who made it. I think they did it with the right intentions, and I think it was really entertaining, which is what their job is. As a climate, action-oriented climate change advocate, I sort of wish we had been invited in to help think a few things through in advance.
Thank you! I couldn't have completed this project without a little extra coffee. And since I brush with Colgate's Pro Series toothpaste with an expert-level whitening for a vibrant glow, I could show up to set each day camera ready and smiling wide.
Well, Kelly, looks like a little Colgate gave you a lot of confidence.
Colgate Optic White. Find it at all major retailers.
Life is hard, but finding a really great podcast makes the days go by so much easier. Hi, my name is Blue Telusma. I'm a writer, an emotional intelligence coach, and the host of Humanize with Blue Telusma, a podcast where we believe that when you humanize everyone in the room, a great conversation is almost guaranteed. Join us every week here on Electricast as me and my guest co-hosts unpack big topics and interview even bigger personalities with a sense of humor and a dash of mischief. If you're looking for a new best friend in your head, we've got you covered. Electricast.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking ahead into this year, not much left this year. In the US, there is one election left this year, but then the year is pretty much done. But looking a bit further into the next year already, what is the kind of the big things on your table? What are you hoping to, I don't know, reach or achieve, or what could be the milestones to reach for the rare in the new year?
Well, I mean, if we can actually start with this week and this month, this week and next month. Certainly, the election is a very big deal in the United States, and there's certainly one party that is way more interested in addressing climate change meaningfully than the other party. So that's very clear, I think, to everyone in the world. There are two big meetings, one going on this week in Cali, Colombia, and I have a large contingent of staff who are in Colombia right now working on the biodiversity convention of the parties. And that there's a lot of discussion within the COP this week on biodiversity, about the role of nature in addressing climate change, the role of local and indigenous people in preserving biodiversity, new and creative ways that we're going to need to bring capital to biodiversity conservation, the prioritization of the 30 by 30 targets globally, which state that countries are going to work to conserve 30% of their land and their sea by 2030. And I think there's clear evidence that we're not on a path to achieving 30 by 30, and that we're going to have to redouble efforts and bring more money into the space and get more government commitments. But then I think more importantly, over time, we are going to have to find meaningful ways of engaging people every day in their everyday walks of life to help meet those targets. That just having a top-down protected area creation program, the likes of which we've been running for 100 years now, at least in the United States, is not going to get us there. There's a new emphasis on what are called other effective conservation measures, OECMs, which is one of the things that RARE specializes in helping develop, which is like our fisheries work, the idea that if you want to restore, much less preserve, a particular biodiversity hotspot, it's going to be far easier to have local people become stewards of that environment than to create a park and kick everybody out and have them have local people left to be poachers. So if we want our fellow humans to be stewards instead of poachers, we're going to have to meaningfully involve them in conservation efforts. That's a big theme. Those are the big themes for this week. I think next month, a whole bunch of folks will be going to Baku in Azerbaijan in order to talk about the climate convention of the parties, which is held every year. This convention became most popular when the Paris Agreement was achieved. And for those of you who don't know, usually the agreement is named after the city in which the agreement is made. So it's therefore called the Paris Agreement. We were in Paris when the deal was done, and we're still trying to live up to the promise of that agreement. One of the big challenges
doesn't look very promising.
Well, we are not on track. That is for sure. We are certainly not on track to hit to maintain a global average temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is ideal. We are not even on track to hit a global average temperature increase of 2 degrees Celsius. And for my American friends, that's 3.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which I like to remind people is far greater than the difference between you and your roommate or your housemate in terms of the temperature you like to keep the house. So imagine the challenge that's going to create for, animals and nature and our atmosphere all over the planet. So we're not on track. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I was just reading the last week's review of the United Nations Environment Program on how far we are from it. Basically, it looked quite, how would I say, pessimistic.
We are way behind schedule. And it's not just about money. It's mostly about leadership. It's mostly about helping folks follow through on and committing themselves and the capital needed to making the change that we know is necessary. So,
Absolutely.
long way to go.
But I think your points on the human behavior and are something which could help on that way quite significantly.
We firmly believe that. It was only 2 years ago that the UNFCCC finally came out with an update on the Paris Agreement and created a whole pretty significant call for using more behavioral science, leveraging more human behavior change to help accelerate the adoption of solutions that we know we need in order to hit these targets. What's interesting is that it took a very long time for that realization to sink in. And it's a shame because, at least in the United States, we've had a 30-year climate change, going on 40-year climate change movement that has focused almost entirely on top-down, high-level policy change, which is important and necessary, and technological solutions and investing in new technology solutions that is also important, while telling the average American, in a way, something we've been telling many people in other countries, that their individual behavior doesn't matter. And so what that's created is this sort of expertitis, where unless you're a PhD in advising a congressperson in Washington D.C., your vote doesn't count. What that means is about 95% of Americans have been left on the sidelines, sort of watching this ping pong match between, experts speaking science and disinformers, speaking rubbish. And the result is a lot of confusion, a cultural war, not a lot of understanding, and most importantly, for my money, for my time, this feeling of helplessness, the feeling that it's too big a problem, my individual behavior doesn't matter. And yet, a vote matters, a checkbook matters, your shopping patterns matter. As we discussed earlier, the way you heat and cool your home matters. The way you drive to and from work or the grocery store matters. The diet, the things you order at dinner with your friends, this is our culture. Our culture is comprised of the decisions we make and the way we adorn ourselves, the things we talk about. So if 95% of Americans have been told for decades, you don't matter, just vote and send us money and we'll solve the problem. We've done a disservice, a significant disservice. Now, it's easy to say, well, you're not going to get 330 million Americans, or you're not going to get 8 billion people around the world to change their behavior. But that's really not the point. We're not going to prescribe, and we're not going to technify our way out of this. We need both, and we need the teeming masses of people believing they can make a difference. That's how democracies thrive, and that's how we're going to shift the way we inhabit this planet.
Good. Thank you, Brett. That's a good, strong point to finish the discussion. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Cheers.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Geraldine Glass, a leader in the field of music as medicine, and I'm excited to share with you my newest release of healing sound, Pentatonic Visions, with Chris Scholler and Electrocast Records. Immerse yourself in ethereal realms where the harmonies of nature, tribal rhythms, and soundscapes blend with the crystal singing bowls. It's out now, streaming on all platforms.
Hello, folks. Earl Breon here, host of the Responsible Leadership Podcast, part of the Best Business Network on Electrocast. If you're looking for a show to bring you some of the best leadership advice from some of the top thought leaders around the globe, this is the show for you. You can find us on all the podcast platforms of choice or on social media by following me, Earl Breon, Breon.
Electrocast.